Hey class, Sis. So this is going to make up for a couple of classes that have been missed. We're going to talk about the president some. I'm going to review a little bit of information, or what will be a review for um, my noon class, my 4 p.m. class. I think some of this will be new information for you because y'all got canceled more than the noon class did. Okay. Talk about the president, finish him up on Friday, but to get through some stuff today, now, whatever. Uh, GTCC will be closed Thursday. Holy. Okay, well, hopefully we'll have class on Friday. It's going to be cold. Bundle up. Okay, um, there have been 44 presidents. Obama's the 44th. Each president can serve 2 4-year terms, meaning each president can be elected twice. Okay. Um, the president is the leader of the military. He's a civilian leader of the military, and that's a very important sort of distinction. A civilian being the commander of the armed forces versus a separate military person being the commander of the armed forces. Having that civilian line of command helps prevent things like coups and such. Um, The president is the head of the executive branch, and the president is the only person that is voted on and elected by all Americans. Okay. Um, the president's elected through an indirect election known as the Electoral College. So what happens is we go and vote for the president um, every 4 years. Well, what we're actually doing, we're going and voting for the president, but what happens is whichever president wins our state, wins the most votes in the state, that president's set of electors will go and vote for the president in the electoral college. So while we are voting for the president, it's not actually a direct election. We're not literally voting for the president. We're actually literally voting for people that will then go and vote for the president. They have the president and the vice president on the ticket because the other way is like super arcane and nobody does it. But that's the electoral college system we have. Um, the number of votes each state gets at the electoral college corresponds to its total membership in Congress. Total membership in Congress being 2 senators and at least one member of the House of Representatives. If a state has, say, 13 members of the House of Representatives, like North Carolina does, it would get 15 votes because you add those 2 senators with the 13 members of the House and you get 15. Um, DC, District of Columbia, is not a state. It does not have any representation in the Senate. It has a representative in the House, but that representative is a non-voting member. Um, she is just sort of there to represent DC's interests, the citizens of DC, but she doesn't actually have any power. The citizens of the District of Columbia are, you might say, taxed without representation since they don't have any say in what happens to them on the federal level. Even though Congress is actually in control of DC, the Washingtonians don't have any say in Congress. And it was only in the 1970s that the citizens of the District of Columbia got the ability to have their voices heard when it came to voting for the president. Before then, they didn't get to even vote for the president. Okay, so each state gets a certain number of representatives based upon its population, um, and that's the number of electoral votes that state gets. Here's a concept that I was trying to explain on Monday to my noon class. That seemed a little difficult to get because of the electoral college system. There are some states whose vote or votes are worth more than the number of people they have um, would sort of suggest or necessitate. I went through, I have an Excel spreadsheet here in which I put all the states' population down and did crazy percentages. So actually I have a hopefully real life example for you. That's hard numbers. Okay, California. California holds 12.1% of the nation's population. 12.1% of all the people in the United States live in California. However, California only gets 10.2% of the number of votes in the Electoral College. So, if you would expect Californians' voices to be heard equally as everybody else in the country's voice, they're 12.1% of the country, you would expect them to have 12.1% of the vote at the Electoral College. However, they only have 10.2% of the vote. Okay? Whereas a state like Alaska has 0.23% of the population. Okay? There's 736,000 people that live in Alaska, and that represents 2.3% of the population. However, the number of electoral votes Alaskans get is another small figure, 0.56% of the electoral vote. So while Californians are underrepresented at the Electoral College by a full, almost 2%, Alaskans have a 0.3% advantage. Doesn't sound like a lot, and in a lot of ways it's not. Um, However, when you add all of that up, um, let's see. So, math. I was trying to make the point that the Electoral College sort of structurally seems to favor Republicans in red states. The reason why, is because the red states are generally smaller, which means, like Alaska, they have a larger say in the Electoral College than their population would otherwise indicate. So, Democrats, since they win larger states, like California, based upon the population of the states Democrats win, those states are worth less at the Electoral College than they would be if the Electoral College was divided up evenly between all the states. Here's the final figure. The Electoral College, based upon how the votes, which states are red, which states are blue, the Electoral College gives the Republicans roughly a 2.3 to 3% advantage in the Electoral College. Um, yeah. So 538 to 5. That was loud in my ear. Roughly, they might get a 14 to 16 electoral sort of head start. So because Republicans win small states, those small states actually add up to about a 15 to 16 electoral vote head start over the Democrats. That's like essentially Republicans get the state of North Carolina or the equivalent of the state of North Carolina for free in terms of percentage of the electoral vote. Um, Maybe that helps some. It's not about always which state is biggest. Democrats do not have an advantage because they win California and New York. Republicans actually have an advantage because they win small states, at least a built-in advantage. However, through sheer coincidence and demographic blind luck, Democrats actually hold a advantage right now in the Electoral College, despite the fact that they sort of start out with this, um, 15 to 16 vote deficit in the Electoral College. This is because, again, purely by accident, the Democrats and Republicans have kind of, say, the Electoral College has kind of been gerrymandered in the Democrats' favor, if you think about it. So, remember we talked about gerrymandering in the legislature. Um, Sorry, very loud noise happened. Um, we talked about gerrymandering in the legislature, in Congress, where what you do is a party can grab a disproportionate share of the votes, sorry, of the representation in Congress by gerrymandering the districts. Now, this means taking, for example, all the Republicans in a state and pushing them into as few districts as possible. So now you have, like, say, 3 districts with 70 to 80% Republicans in those districts. Okay, Republicans are going to win those districts, like, no matter what. However, you have, let's say, 10 other districts where Democrats outnumber Republicans, say 6 to 4. So about 60% of those people in the population of that district tend to vote Democrat. What you have is, even though you've created a few districts that will absolutely never in the history of the world, until hell freezes over, vote for a Democrat, you've actually guaranteed the Democrats more seats than their actual number in the state would predict it to be, because the Democrats have made it so a whole bunch of districts have a majority of Democrats, but not a large majority, and then they've shoved all the Republicans into one district. Um, while nobody's shoved all Republicans into a few states, and Democrats haven't drawn the state lines to favor themselves, the fact of the matter is, if you look at states like Alaska, Alabama, Arkansas, Louisiana, um, Wyoming, Montana, North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, if I didn't say that already, Oklahoma, um, Mississippi, Kansas, Kentucky, Idaho. These are all states which overwhelmingly vote Republican. So you have Um, let's make it simple. You have about um, 320 million people in the country. 160 million are Democrats, 160 million are Republicans. You think it'd get, 50-50 split electoral vote, 50-50 split popular vote. However, those 160 million Republicans, 100 million of them have put themselves in, say, 8 of the 50 states. The other 60 million are spread out among the other states, whereas the Democrats aren't in those 8 states at all, but they are also spread out among the other 48 states, 42 states, which would mean they would be the majority in those states. Not because they're the majority overall in the country, but because Democrats happen to have spread themselves out in such across the country in such a way where they have a, say, 55% majority in most states that they win, whereas Republicans have a 90% majority in most states they win. That's a bit of an exaggeration. But look at the totals. Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota, um, what are some of those other states? Iowa, Oregon, and Washington even. If you look at some of those states, they vote, say, 50, all consistently seem to vote Democrat, but to vote Democrat at the tune of 52, 53, 54% of the population. Whereas if you look at the states Republicans win, Alabama, Georgia, Idaho, Utah, you're going to be looking at Republicans winning those states with 60 to 65, even in the case of Utah, maybe 70% of the vote. Um, so right now, the Democrats hold that advantage because they spread them out amongst enough states. And if you look at the PowerPoint slide, there's a um, slide, Electoral College favoritism. Democrats have about 240 to 260 electoral votes as safe. You click on that link, it shows states that have gone for the Democrats in all 6 of the last presidential elections, or Republicans for all 6 of the last presidential elections. You'll notice Democrats start out with 242 electoral votes. And considering states like Colorado, um, Nevada, New Mexico, and Virginia are becoming more Democratic, whereas these states maybe used to be slightly Republican, now they're slightly Democratic, and maybe even we can say a little more solidly Democratic. Um, the Democrats have built up a pretty good electoral college advantage there, despite the fact that, again, the electoral college seems to innately give Republicans a 15 or so electoral vote advantage. Okay. Whew. Makes sense. Of course it does. Look at that, study that map where it says the link is on there for safe. It's linked safe. Um, I might ask a couple of questions about which states are swing states, which states have voted for Democrats or Republicans for all the last presidential elections, whatever, blah, blah, blah. Okay, cool. Um, all right, so presidential power. So we can go through some of the powers, get through at least the president's military power. Okay, so there are 3 types of powers, generally speaking. You have the president that the president has. They're the express powers or expressed powers. Those are the powers that are expressed in the Constitution. They are written there in ink on paper. Express powers. The Constitution says the president has the power to do this. The president has the power to do that. There are delegated powers. these are powers that the president is given to him or her from Congress. Okay, so excuse me. While Congress has um, the power to make law, to set certain regulations, and um, enact certain, you know, government policy. In some cases, in the legislation, Congress may pass that off to the president in the executive branch. So Congress may say something like, um, we want our water to be clean. However, we don't know what clean water is, so EPA, go and define clean water for us. And so they've delegated the power of this sort of rule making ability, this sort of legislative ability. They've delegated that power to the EPA so the EPA can say, well, this is what clean water is. And so we're going to enforce the law that Congress passed um, based upon our definition of clean water because Congress told us that's what Congress wanted us to do. It's confusing. Side note, in case you're wondering, I am sitting on a workout ball thing, it's bouncy thing. So that's why I may be going up and down sometimes. Usually I sit in a chair, but I get bored of chairs sometimes because I'm sitting down so much. Okay, so you got those delegated powers. Delegated powers are super, super duper important, um, especially when it comes to administrative action and executive orders. Some of those things that become super controversial when the member of one party whose president does something that is perfectly legal for them to do and constitutional. As a matter of fact, Congress told them to do it. But say the other party doesn't like the fact that the president is of not their party, and so they just complain about everything. Um, might be happening now. It might have happened 2015, 2008, 7 years ago, and 10 years ago. One of those things that generally just happens. All right, so you got express powers, stated in the Constitution, delegated powers, powers that Congress gives the president, and then you got inherent powers. These are powers that are not explicitly stated in the Constitution, but implied, or powers presidents have developed over time. The Supreme Court has recognized the president as having certain powers that might not expressly be stated in the Constitution, or Congress has sort of not explicitly delegated the power, but said, yeah, the president pretty much can do this. Um, one of those, a quick example of between the two, the president has the express power to appoint people to cabinet positions. So the president can appoint somebody to be the EPA administrator. The Constitution doesn't say the president has the power to remove that person as an EPA administrator. However, it's been assumed that the president actually does have that power because the person, as the saying now goes, serves at the pleasure of the president. If the president has the power to appoint somebody to a position and there isn't anything else in the Constitution that says that that appointment is guaranteed, the president has the power to remove that person from the position. Some of this can get a little dicey when it comes to the president appointing certain members of the Department of Justice, but um, in terms of the president's executive staff in general, that's the way that goes. Now, judges, the president appoints judges, but this is a different matter because in the Constitution it says judges get lifetime appointments unless they are impeached for some, major crime and misdemeanor, whatever it says exactly in there. Um, so that while the president appoints judges, the president can't remove judges. The Congress has to do that. Okay, so unappointment power, slide 10. You got your quote from the Constitution about the president shall nominate and by and with the advice and consent of the Senate shall appoint blah 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 blah. Second point, the president shall have the power to fill vacancies that happen during the recess of the Senate, blah 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 blah. The upshot of this is the president has the power to, like I've been saying, appoint people to fill executive offices. However, the Senate must confirm their appointments. The president can't just throw people around in office without the Senate saying, okay, good. Except for one instance, when the Senate is in recess, when the Senate is not in session, so that the Senate cannot, as the Constitution says, advise and consent on presidential appointments, the president can fill the vacancies, and the vacancies will be filled temporarily until the Senate comes back from recess, essentially. So, how this actually looks, what this process looks like, is the Senate goes on recess, the president appoints somebody, and that person fills that vacancy for a year until they need to be sort of confirmed by the Senate. They get sort of a year in there. This provision was put in there in part because, if you can imagine, think back to olden times where the Senate maybe wasn't in session as much as it is today, and people had to travel by horse and buggy to get everywhere, and it might take weeks for all the senators to be recalled to decide on some appointment, and maybe there's been a crisis where the president needs somebody in that position. The Constitution put that in there so that the president, in a case of an emergency or a time of need or whatever, you can have the recess appointment can fill that vacancy without needing to call back the Senate, but there's a time limit on it. Over time, this power, recess appointment power, has been used to fill certain more controversial, well, fill vacancies with more controversial people. So there's some judges that maybe are batshit crazy, might be the appropriate word, okay, or the phrase. And there's a president that really wants to make that person a judge. No way the Senate's going to confirm them. Okay? So what the president will do, wait for the Senate to go in recess, and then make that judge, fill that judgeship with the judge during the recess, with the recess appointment. So the president will be able to get around needing to have that person confirmed by the Senate for a year, so that the president can get their people in power, even if they're batshit crazy. Now, the president can do this for every year, and the Senate will just not confirm them. And then, let's say it's a judge after the 8 years is up, the president isn't there to reappoint them during a recess period, then the judge doesn't get to be judge anymore. This became a contentious issue because recently meaning like in the past 5 years, there are some positions in the executive branch that the Republicans just don't agree should even exist. One of them being the National Labor Relations Board, NLB, National Labor, NLRB, National Labor Relations Board. There have been vacancies there. The National Labor Relations Board hears disputes between labor and business and um, adjudicates those hearings or those issues, makes rulings kind of like judges. Um, the Republicans in the Senate don't like that board even exists because sometimes they make rulings saying like that unions get to exist. So the Republicans have been calling the Senate into session every couple of days well, they did it for about, 3 or 4 years. Um, so that technically the Senate would never go into recess, so Obama could never make a recess appointment, so that then anybody the Republicans wanted to filibuster, they could, because Obama couldn't make any recess appointments because the Senate never went into recess, technically. Now, the Senate's own rules say that it's got to have these certain, um, a certain number of people there um, for it to not be in recess. It goes on recess during a certain time of the year, things like that. However, the Republicans, despite those rules, would send somebody there to the Senate, gavel in the Senate for about 2 hours, and gavel it out so that they could say the Senate was there to do Senate business and the president can't make any recess appointments. Obama said, screw this, I can make these appointments that you guys are filibustering. You're in recess, come on, really. Made the appointments, those people took their positions, made some rulings. The Senate Republicans sued Obama, and the Supreme Court agreed with the Senate Republicans, saying that the Senate gets to make its own rules and gets to decide if it's in recess or not. Um, and the Senate Republicans were able to um, demonstrate that they were, I guess, doing a very good job at following the technical letter of the rule in the Senate. If not necessarily the spirit of the rule in the Senate, the technical rule of the Senate, but technicalities matter a lot. So the Supreme Court ruled that the president uh, didn't have the power to appoint people into office during, well, a fake recess. The Senate was in recess, but it was a fake recess, basically. The thing that's remarkable about this is that this sort of appointment power has been used by Democrats and Republicans consistently over the past, say, forever. Um, but this was the first time that one of the parties actually said, you know what? We're going to challenge this authority. We're going to challenge this if we can, if the president can really do this or not. That one of the things that's remarkable about it is that Republicans have been engaging in this sort of recess appointment for a very, very long time themselves, just like Democrats, just like everybody. Um, and generally, neither party will call the other one out on some powers that the president maybe assumes, even though it might not be strictly written into the Constitution, because that other party wants to have that power when they're in office also. So in this case, the Republicans said, you know what? Screw it. We don't care if we have this power right anymore. So now that there's a Democrat in office, we're going to sue saying that this power doesn't exist. Um, and that'll be that. And they had they had a really good constitutional argument. If it didn't necessarily agree with the spirit of the Senate rules, constitutionally, it was a pretty solid um, case. And there's some troubling, um, there could be some very troubling fallout from it in terms of like the functioning of government and whatnot. But they made a very convincing constitutional argument. So now, the next time a Republican becomes president, the Democrats can filibuster any appointments that Republican makes, and even prevent the Republican president from making recess appointments because the Republicans decided to, you know, call foul on that power. Cool. Speaking of calling foul on powers and powers the presidents have that neither party is willing to call the president on, the president's military power. So we said the president is the leader of the armed forces. The president has the power to send people into battle and such, um, and set the general policies of the military and sort of create a kind of strategy. Now, I want to make a very clear, let's say it, distinction isn't the right word. Make a point clear about the president's military power. Technically, the president has the power to lead like troops into battle. To say, okay, you know, Fifth Army Corps Marines, the 3rd Regiment, the 2nd Battalion of that regiment go and attack the people from the left flank, and then the tank division of the 3rd Corps of the regiment of soldiers attack from the right flank, and airplanes fly over and bomb. You can tell I know a lot about military structure. Big Civil War buff. That's pretty much where my understanding of military structure ended, and I'm pretty sure we've evolved the way we organize military a little bit since then. And also their tanks in the Civil War, there weren't tanks. Okay, so the president theoretically can do that, but the president doesn't do that, okay? Here's what the means by the president has control of the military, or at least how it is practically today. You have your military commanders, your admirals, your generals, whatever. They devise various strategies for the president to pick from, various plans for the president to pick from. So the generals will say, you know what, we can, let's take the Osama bin Laden killing thing, for instance. All the various people involved with that, CIA, the military, whatever, said, all right, Mr. President, we think we know where Osama bin Laden's hiding out. It's this place in Pakistan. It's a little compound area. Apparently, they have like video games there. And I heard this might be an urban legend or something, but I think there might have been porn there, which made everybody laugh a little bit because, you know, you got your sort of fundamentalist, crazy religious situation going on, and porn something heathens enjoy. Don't know if that's actually true, but okay, that's not part of the story. Okay, president, we know where Osama bin Laden is. Here's what the compound looks like. Here's the area. We've devised 3 different ways we can deal with this situation. Okay, here are the chances of success, here are the chances of failure, and here are the risks involved. So we can fly a drone over the area and strike the target. The chances of success are high in the fact that the target would be hit. However, we won't get very good confirmation as to whether or not we actually killed Osama bin Laden. Um, there are additional risks, maybe of civilian casualties, um, but American lives won't be at risk. We have this helicopter super team plan where we will take like 20 people and fly them in and drop them down on the ground, and they'll raid the compound and find Bin Laden, see if he's really actually there, and then shoot him in the head. Now, this carries this risk of Americans might die. It has, 80% chance of success, a 10% chance of failure, and a 10% chance of Armageddon. Um, which one do you want to do? And then the president will go, let's do that SEAL team one where they shoot the guy in the head. The army will go, cool, okay, we'll do that. Then the army guys will go back to their other army guys and say, all right, this is what we're doing. We're going in there with the helicopters and the Marines, and we're taking this guy out with our guns in our eyes so we can make sure we really get him. That's basically, in a super crazy described way, what happened. There were these various options. Obama consulted with the Joint Chiefs of Staff, his other executive cabinet members, Vice President, Secretary of State, blah, 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 whatever. Apparently, Joe Biden argued very strongly against sending in the American soldiers. Obama said, shut up, Biden, and did the thing he did instead of the drone strike. And here we are today. He got to make that 11 p.m. announcement, which I think he could have just waited till morning. I was up late that night. It was annoying. Okay, so that's the way the president exercises military power. However, in the Constitution, while the president is the head of the military, only the Congress can declare war. While the president can set policy and sort of direct troops or create the overall strategy of troops, of military, Congress is sort of the only body that can actually send troops into battle. Again, theoretically, there's developed a lot of constitutional gray area in here. The president, being a single leader of the military, has assumed more and more authority over sending troops into battle. Some ways maybe it seems natural. I don't know. However, in the 70s, Congress tried to take a little bit of that power back. So what would happen would be the president would send troops into a foreign nation, do some fighting, and then only later go to Congress for permission, or Congress would grant the president permission after the president sent the troops into battle, and then the president would look at the permission Congress gave him and say, I never needed this in the first place, so you can take your permission and throw it in the trash can because I have this power, being the president. But in the 1970s, Congress passed something called the War Powers Resolution Act, which allowed the president to send troops into battle if there was an imminent threat or a actual fight against Americans or American interests overseas. The president sort of has that sort of pre-given authority. However, the president can only have the troops engaged in battle for 60 days. After 60 days, the president has to go to Congress, explain what he or she is doing, why it matters, and get Congress to approve an extended stay for the troops overseas, doing some fighting. Um, it's been passed. No presidents actually sort of followed along with it. And Congress has let the president get away with it, essentially. Um, so, for example, President Obama's intervention in Libya, technically might have been totally unconstitutional because we were engaged in military action for way longer than 60 days, and there wasn't any like real direct threat to Americans. So yeah, but Republicans in Congress aren't going to call them on it because Republican presidents do that all the time. Just like Democratic presidents do it all the time. Republicans want to maintain that authority when there's a Republican president. And if you call the president on something like that, maybe you're not supporting the troops because for some reason in this country, being critical of the president's military decisions means you hate the troops on the ground. That's like apparently 100% the way it is. So, darn straight. Um, but something interesting has happened with Obama over the past couple of years. Obama has been hesitant to lob bombs at some people without getting permission from Congress. It's almost like he was a constitutional scholar, which he is, by the way, and following the rule of the Constitution. Almost as if. Of course, um, he's gotten flack for this from Republicans because he's not acting like a tyrant czar king they always said he was, and they didn't want him to be, but now they do want him to be. Um, he's getting flack from Democrats because why is he even trying to lob bombs at anybody? We should, all hold hands and sing Kumbaya and smoke some. We should get all potted up and listen to cultural flute music or something and be all happy with each other. So liberals don't like him. Republicans don't like him. So Obama, by trying to go through Congress to get like official approval to send troops into battle like the Constitution suggests he should, kind of has put himself in a terrible situation. I don't know why. He's kind of not the best politician of all time. Um, Smart guy. He's got a clear vision. Um, knows his stuff. Doesn't really do well with that whole negotiation thing. Sometimes he can be a little naive. Um, Anyway, so I have an example on here. Syria in August and September 2013, he was going to ask Congress for permission to strike at some Syrian targets because Syria had theoretically or supposedly used chemical weapons. That was not proven. However, there was evidence that chemical weapons were used, and we're gonna, assume the Syrian government did it, not the rebels. Totally fine. Um, David Cameron, the British Prime Minister, also wanted to engage in Syria, some military action. David Cameron went to the British Parliament and got rejected. British Parliament gave him the no, and they probably all shouted and laughed at him while they did it because the UK Parliament is just that awesome. Um, so Obama was going to be defeated. Everybody knew that Congress was going to vote against him and his use of military action because the Republicans were going to vote against him because Obama is Obama. And let's say about 70 or so of the Democrats in the House were going to vote against him because Obama is not a liberal and not a peacenik. Um, so he was going to lose. However, Vladimir Putin comes running to Obama's rescue, and he and John Kerry hammer out an agreement where Obama doesn't have to ask Congress for permission to send or to engage in military action against Syria. As a matter of fact, Obama goes, "Whoa, Congress, please, you don't need to vote on this at all. We got the problem sorted. Please don't vote. Because if you do vote, I'm going to lose, and that'll be super embarrassing." Um, so that was then. Flash forward today, we got ISIS. The president has um, said he wants to engage in some military action, has done some things, has, like a fool, asked Congress for official approval to engage in military action overseas, like the Constitution says he should, and that was always going to be a no-win situation for him because Congress um, were run by children. Um, Republicans are mad at him because he's not a king, and no matter what plan he would have put before Congress, it would have been rejected anyway. Republicans because he's Obama, and Democrats because of the whole peacenik factor of the Democratic Party. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with the proposed military involvement, how long it will last, if something will get passed, what will America's action overseas against ISIS look like. Hopefully it all works out for the best. I don't want anybody killed. That's my position. I don't like that. It's probably a good thing I'm not president. So that's the power of the some military power stuff. Well, that was interesting and fun. Um, I'll get through. I'll talk briefly about. Okay, inherent powers. Just a couple of quick things here. All right. So military, that's an express power. Power to appoint people is an express power. There's in the Constitution something that says the power or the president should have the power to perform the duties of the executive office. Very vague, very generalized. Um, what does that mean? So there's some like bullet points. The president has power to do X, Y, Z, and then there's this broad line, and the president has the power to do whatever else the president needs to do to fulfill the role of an executive. Um, So what does that mean? Well, we got some inherent powers, is what we've determined that means. Now, the president is voted on by all Americans, um, and as such, gets to represent the American people. Um, with that mandate, with being voted on by all Americans and having that sort of unique um, authority or political capital that comes with everybody in the country voting on you and deciding if you are going to be the leader or not, gives you the two important powers that I like to highlight. One is the power of the bully pulpit. The other is legislative initiative. So the president has the power of the bully pulpit. What this means is the president has the power to run around the country and campaign for policies and ideas that he likes. Um, the president can do that in California, can do that in North Carolina, can do that in Iowa, can do that in Maine, can do that all over the country, and the president can call a special press conference and things like that and get the nation's attention to say, this issue is really important, we need to do something about it. Members of Congress don't necessarily have that same power. My representative, Virginia Fox, is a member of Congress. She gets voted on by people in my North Carolina district. However, she doesn't have the power of the bully pulpit because she's only voted on by the members of my North Carolina district. She doesn't necessarily have the authority to go to California and say, Californians, we should do this. Because Californians are going to be like, you're from North Carolina, what are you doing here? Go back home. Nobody voted on her there. Nobody cares about her. Same thing with Senator Barbara Boxer from California. Barbara Boxer can go around California campaigning for certain things. However, Barbara Boxer comes to North Carolina, we're going to be like, what the heck are you doing here? Go back out west, you frickin' hippie. Okay? I think that's exactly what we'd say. Then we'd drink sweet tea. Because sweet tea is delicious. Okay, so the president being voted on by everybody gives him the power to speak for Americans. Say it that way also, the power of the bully pulpit. To campaign to all Americans, to speak for Americans, to command the nation's attention because the nation already as a whole voted on this person. The other power is the power of legislative initiative. Now, this essentially means the president has the inherent power to drive debate in Congress. Congress is made up of 535 people, 435 in the House and 100 in the Senate. That's a heck of a lot of people trying to decide what to do legislatively for the country. All right. However, you have the president who's voted on by all Americans and who, theoretically has his ear to what all Americans want. The president can help focus Congress's energies towards a specific goal. So, there's a reason why people talk about immigration when the president says, let's talk about immigration. Because the president has that power to drive debate in Congress and to, say, put certain issues on the legislative agenda. Whereas other members of Congress can also do that, but not to the same effect. We've seen, especially with the House of Representatives, the fact that the president doesn't have this power expressly a lot recently, whereas the Senate has, immigration's a good example of this. The Senate has passed an immigration bill. Obama's been trying to get an immigration bill passed for since the day he was in office. But since 2010, the House of Representatives just hasn't done anything on it at all. It's like, listen, we're the House. We're given powers to do things by the Constitution, so we're going to do those things. We don't need to pay attention to what the president wants. We're going to do what the House does. John Boehner pretty much says that exact thing. John Boehner's exactly right. The House can do whatever the House wants to do. So they haven't done anything on immigration because that's not what John Boehner wants to do. So you can see that inherent power, the power of legislative initiative, it's there, but sometimes when you have a very dedicated House majority, for example, nothing will get done. Let's see. We'll go over. I might have gotten cut off a little bit there. Inherent powers, blah blah blah. We'll go over the rest of the PowerPoint slides on Friday, assuming there's class. Everybody bundle up. Let's take a look here. It right now is 20 degrees outside. It is 11:30, so that's not shocking in some ways. It'll be 7 degrees is the low for tonight. Thursday, the high is going to be 17 degrees. And the overnight low, Thursday to Friday morning, will be roughly 2 degrees, could be less than 0 degrees Fahrenheit. Holy cow. That's cold. That's super cold. And there's wind chill going on. There's some wind. You could die, so don't go outside. That's the lesson. Don't die and go outside. Well, don't go outside and then die. Also, don't die. That's a good lesson in general. I will try and be up very, very early tomorrow morning and Friday morning because I never experienced single digit temperatures, and I'm kind of curious as to how cold that is. So I'm going to experiment with that. But I won't go very far outside of my apartment because I don't want to die. I hear hypothermia sucks, and frostbite can make you lose appendages. Okay, so that's your lesson on the war powers and some of this stuff with the president. You can ask me some questions about it in class, but this is your lecture on it. I expect you to know it. It's in the book too, so like read the book. It's important. I don't like just give you chapters because I'm a jerk. I give you chapters to read and learn, and expect you to know the information. So I'll pull some of this stuff out onto a quiz, so y'all will at least have some exposure to it beforehand. All right. Have a good day Thursday and Friday and Saturday and forever. I look forward to seeing y'all again. I miss you. Okay, bye.